It cost 16 cents. That was the number that satisfies everyone and destroys everything. In 1956, loading a ton of cargo onto a ship the old way, by hand, crate by crate, sack by sack, cost $5.83. A truck driver from North Carolina with no college degree brought that number down to 16 cents in a single voyage. He did not invent a faster ship. He did not build a better dock. He built a steel box. Malcolm McLean was born in 1913 in Maxton, a small town in Robeson County. His family did not have the money for college. By 21, he had bought a used truck and started hauling goods for local farmers during the Depression. He was good at it. Within a few years, he had a fleet. By his mid-30s, McLean Trucking was the 5th largest in the country. But the idea that would reshape the global economy came to him long before that, in 1937, on a dock in New Jersey, because he spent most of that day sitting in his truck, watching longshoremen carry cotton bales aboard a ship, one piece at a time. The inefficiency was enormous. A crew of 20 to 30 men needed 5 to 8 days to load a single medium-sized vessel, handling every crate, every barrel, every bale individually while the ship sat idle and the meter ran. McLean understood, in a way the shipping industry did not, that the problem was not the ship or the truck. It was the gap between them. Cargo was being touched too many times. If the goods stayed in one container, the container itself could move, from truck to ship to train, and nobody would ever need to open it. Loading would take hours instead of days. Theft would collapse. Insurance costs would fall. The economics were obvious. The obstacles were not. Government regulations carved the industry into rigid lanes. Trucking companies could not own ships. Shipping lines could not own trucks. The longshoremen's unions, representing tens of thousands of workers whose livelihoods depended on the old system, would resist any technology that replaced hands with cranes, and no port in America had the infrastructure, the cranes, the berths, the chassis, to handle containers that did not yet exist. McLean waited almost 2 decades. Then, in 1955, he sold his trucking company. He used the proceeds and a $22 million bank loan to buy 2 rusting World War II tanker ships from government surplus. He hired Keith Tantlinger, a mechanical engineer from Brown Industries who had spent years building truck trailers and who held dozens of transportation patents. McLean told Tantlinger what he wanted, a way to stack heavy steel boxes on a ship so they would not move in a storm. Tantlinger designed a corner casting, a reinforced steel fitting bolted to each of the container's 8 corners, and a twist-lock mechanism that let one box latch onto the one below it with a quarter turn of a handle. A crane operator, sitting in a cab 40 feet above the dock, could grab a container by its fittings, drop it into a slot, and lock it down without a single human hand touching the cargo inside. On April 26, 1956, a converted tanker called the Ideal X left Port Newark, New Jersey, carrying 58 steel containers on its reinforced deck and 15,000 tons of petroleum in its hull below. 5 days later, it docked in Houston. 58 trucks were already waiting at the pier. The containers were lifted off and driven away. Not a single item was missing. Not a single package was opened. The loading had taken less than 8 hours. A job that under the old system would have consumed a full week. The numbers hit the shipping industry like a detonation. $5.83 per ton by hand, 16 cents per ton by container. The gap was not marginal. It was a 97% reduction, and it meant that every dock operation in the world was suddenly paying more than 36 times what it needed to. Then the money started running out. For the old way, McLean renamed his operation Sea Land Service and pushed outward. By 1966, Sea Land was running weekly container sailings from Newark to Rotterdam and Bremerhaven, undercutting every subsidized American carrier on military freight. But the real accelerant was a war. The U.S. military had a logistics crisis in Vietnam. Supplies were arriving late, damaged, and stolen. Breakbulk shipping could not keep pace with the volume. McLean flew to Vietnam, walked the ports, and came back with a proposal. Sea Land would build the cranes, reinforce the piers, and assemble the truck depots, entirely at its own risk. The government would pay only for cargo moved. In 1967, the contract was signed. Between 1967 and 1973, Sea Land collected $450 million in Defense Department revenue. At its peak in fiscal 1971, Military contracts accounted for 30% of the company's total sales. The war did something else McLean had counted on. Ships returning from Southeast Asia were empty. Sealand filled them with commercial cargo from Japan, opening routes on the backhaul. Containerization reached Asia not through trade policy, but through the logistics of a military campaign. In 1968, Tantlinger made the move that turned a business into a system. He convinced McLean to release Sealand's container patents to the International Organization for Standardization at no cost. ISO 668 fixed the dimensions, 20 feet and 40 feet, and the corner fittings that the world still uses. Any container built to the standard could ride on any ship, lock into any crane, and sit on any truck chassis in any country on Earth. McLean had surrendered a monopoly. In return, he got a planet-sized market. In 1969, he sold Sealand for $160 million. The box kept moving without him, and then the cost arrived. Not in dollars, in people. In 1950, there were 100,000 full-time dockworkers in the United States. A ship that once required a crew of 30 men for a week could now be unloaded by 6 workers in hours. The International Longshoremen's Association watched its membership fall from 40,000 in the mid-1950s to under 20,000 by 1970. By the early 2000s, the total number of American dockworker jobs had collapsed to roughly 10,000. The union could not stop the technology. It negotiated instead higher hourly wages, guaranteed minimum pay, and a mechanism called the container royalty, a fee paid to the union for every container that crossed a dock. The reasoning was blunt. If the machine takes the work, the workers get a cut of the machine. The damage was not limited to American waterfronts. It crossed the Atlantic. In Britain, containerization killed ports that had operated for centuries. The Port of London could not accommodate the deeper drafts and wider berths the new ships demanded. Trade migrated to Felixstowe, a town that had barely appeared on a shipping map a decade earlier. Entire neighborhoods that had sustained families on dock wages for generations went quiet. Nobody called it a crisis. The ships did not leave violently. They simply stopped arriving. The container remade geography itself, silently, completely, and without asking permission. Cities built around shallow harbors declined. Cities near deep water and rail junctions grew. The cost of moving goods fell so far that it became cheaper to manufacture a product on the other side of the planet and ship it in a steel box than to produce it locally. The container did not cause globalization, but globalization as it exists could not have happened without it. Today, roughly 90% of the world's non-bulk trade moves inside containers. Global throughput reached 183 million TEUs in 2024. The largest vessels now carry over 20,000 boxes, several hundred times the 58 that rode the Ideal X. The story explains how the box conquered the world. It does not explain where the money goes. Container shipping runs on 4 engines, and the largest is freight. Carriers charge per container per route. Maersk, the world's second-largest line, generated over $37 billion in ocean freight revenue alone in 2024. But rates are volatile. The global industry posted $110 billion in operating profit in 2021, nearly 3 times what it had earned in the previous 10 years combined, driven by pandemic-era port congestion and demand spikes. When conditions reverse, carriers have posted direct losses. The second engine is leasing. Most shipping lines do not own their containers. Nearly 60% of the world's boxes are leased from companies like Triton International, which manages over 7 million TEUs and holds roughly 27% of the global leasing market. Lessors earn 8 to 12% annual returns, quieter money, but steadier. The third engine is terminals. Port operators collect handling fees on every container that crosses a dock. Maersk's terminal division posted record revenue of $1.2 billion in a single quarter in late 2024, running margins of 15 to 20%. The fourth engine is manufacturing. Someone has to build the boxes. The global container production market was worth nearly $11 billion in 2024, dominated by Chinese firms led by CIMC. The steel box McLean put on a tanker in 1956 became the physical unit of world trade. It did not merely lower the cost of shipping, it erased the economic meaning of distance. In 2024, 45,000 dock workers on the U.S. East Coast walked off the job. The dispute was not about wages. It was about automation. The argument the box started in 1956 has not ended yet.